I can hardly believe this myself. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is!
So you may recall in my last video, I compared Geo's Rev 10 shift paddles to the old KLA. And while that I think was a very in-depth and informative video, I even admitted at the end of the video it's moot because the KLA have been out of business for almost 5 years or maybe more at this point. So you can't get them. So comparing the KLA to the Geo's paddles were not very relevant. So in the last few months, I've decided to go ahead and, from the ground up, rebuild the KLA Shift Paddles. And I'm calling these now the Klassic Shift Paddles. So let's go back in time, see how I built these, and then we can come back and see them in action.
The first thing to do was to use the calipers on the original KLA paddles to get the measurements. With all the measurements and just eyeballing it, I hunched over Fusion 360 for more hours than I counted, creating this initial design. After printing out the first revision, I had to remove all the support material, which was excessive due to the extreme print angle required for a strong resulting part. I then gave the part a quick sanding just to avoid having to handle a rough part, and used a file to remove the excess support material inside the hole. Finally, the mounting hole was drilled out to the appropriate size, a requirement to ensure it's a precise fit. Unfortunately, this revision had an issue. I didn't account for the little tab on the plastic factory piece that slides in the paddle, and thus it didn't fit. So it's time for a small redesign in Fusion 360. And yes, I had to uninstall and reinstall the paddle that was in my car, but I'll save the detailed paddle install footage for a separate tutorial video. And one reinstall and uninstall later, you can see the paddle is in the car and working as expected. Even printed in PETG, it felt great, and the click action is perfect. The spacing and fitment is great, very close to the KLA that's in my car. Now it's time to send off the file and have them made in aluminum. After not too long of a wait, all things considered, I have the metal in hand. It's on the right. It's awesome and as good as expected, so now it's off to powder coating. And back from the powder coating, they look a treat. I'm super happy with the way these turned out. Time to get it installed one last time. And now, here they are, fully installed.
Now we're back in the present day. I really want to talk about two things. First, I want to talk about what's the difference between my classic paddles and the old KLA. Then I'll talk about the differences between the classic paddles and Geo's paddles, kind of revisiting that last video. Alright, so first, what's the difference in the classic paddles and the old KLA? Well, the only thing I changed intentionally was I made the bar that's angled, I made it a little smaller, and I made the angle of it a little steeper to try to reduce the problem of the fact that the KLA paddles partially block your two outermost gauges in the car, which is your fuel gauge and your temperature gauge. And I think that if the old KLA had, say, blocked about maybe like 25 to 35%, maybe more like 30 to 35% of that those gauges respectively. I'd say mine block more like 20 to 25 to 28. So I improved it slightly, not a lot, but any improvement's good, I guess. And then there still are a few other differences, and those are mainly just because I didn't really scan in his and copy them dimension for dimension. I just took quick measurements of where things landed and then just eyeballed a lot of the things. So the shape of the actual paddle is different. The angle, there's some angles that are slightly different. The grommet that goes around the outside, like right where it comes out of the stock, that's actually turned out to be a little bit different. Those are things you definitely would notice if you had them side by side, but if you just only had one or the other in your hand, you'd be hard pressed to tell. Alright, so how are the Klassic paddles different from Geo's? Well, I still stand by the Geo's paddles really do look OEM plus. They honestly look like they were made for the car more than the Klassic paddles do. The Klassic paddles really look more like a nice aftermarket part. That's noticeable. Another thing which I didn't actually talk about as much in the video last time, but the KLA/Klassic paddles are more difficult to install. I'm probably not the judge of how much more difficult because I've installed these paddles so many times at this point. But it's definitely more difficult because it's the shroud. When you put the shroud on the paddle and then have to put the paddle in the stock, it's way tighter on the Klassic paddles. There's way less room, and it just makes it a lot harder to balance it all, and then it makes it way harder to screw in the screws. In fact, I didn't even bother to screw in that final screw most of the time. You'd need a really interesting tool to be able to make that work. So those are definitely some disadvantages, and of course the said disadvantage of it partially blocks your gauge. And then the other disadvantage is if you do like to shift down low, like in this area, the Klassic paddles, just like KLA, do block, or they don't really block, but they're very close to the stocks. So that if you try to get your hands in between there, you kind of rub on the stock. So it does make it hard to shift down here. But if you try to shift up top on the steering wheel, it's amazing with the KLA. Better than Geo's in my opinion, because you have more height and you have more spacing here. So that leads into what the main advantage of these KLA. That's really the main advantage of the KLA is because of the way that they're angled and they're farther out from the steering wheel. In fact, they get slightly farther as it goes away from the steering wheel. That's the other thing I didn't explicitly talk about in the last video. But because of that design, you have so much space for your hand, and it will never hit the paddle. And to me, I don't know if it's just because I'm used to it, or I think that in general, if you're the type of person, the way you hold the steering wheel and then you just want more room, to me, the Geo's paddles are just too close to the steering wheel, and they annoy me because I keep rubbing my finger on it. And it's not like a big deal, but to me, it really, really annoyed me. And if that sounds like it would annoy you, that's where the KLAs are more beneficial.
Thanks for watching me bring the KLA back to life as the new Klassic Shift Paddles. And special shout out to Legend R34 on the forums for creating the original awesome KLA paddle. If you like these types of videos where I do crazy projects for my Gallardo, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'm looking forward to hitting 1,000 subs, hopefully by the end of the year. And if you're interested in getting the new Klassic paddles, you can find me on the Lamborghini Talk forums, the Gallardo Facebook group, or on my Instagram, all linked in the description. Thanks for watching. Godspeed.